to report a disturbance. Big speakers blasting like FU music.
Shots fired! Shots fired!
Call ended on Tuesday, January 14, 2014 at 15 hours.
Today is Tuesday, February 7th, 2017. We are on the video record at 1:06 p.m. At this time, would the court reporter swear in the witness?
Would you raise your right hand, please? Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony about to give us the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
John Phillips on behalf of the estate of Mr. Hill. Would you please...
Could I ask you to make sure you speak up?
Yes. And
I can hear people speaking, but I don't always hear clearly what has been said. My hearing's not as good as it used to be.
Okay.
So I may ask you to repeat yourself.
And that's completely fine. Obviously, it's important for you to understand and hear what I say. Probably the opposite order, hear and understand. And I have a habit of looking down while reading and asking questions. So if that becomes a burden or we need to, address so you can see my face, just let me know at any point, okay?
Thank you.
Please state your full name for the record.
Chris Lawrence.
What is it that you do, Mr. Lawrence?
My full-time employment is as a police trainer at the Ontario Police College, which is in Ontario, Canada. But I'm here independent of that role.
Okay. If you're independent of that role, what role are you? What are you with?
I'm sorry. I'm not representing the opinions or policies of the school that I work for or the government that I work for. I'm here as an independent individual offering expert commentary on this matter.
Is that through Elgin Security Consulting?
Inc.
Inc.
Yes, sir.
ELGIN. Do you... what's your country of residency?
Canada.
Okay. Do you have to obtain any sort of visa or approval to work in the States?
I have one, yes.
Okay. Tell me about that.
I have an O1 visa, which is difficult to get, and I've had one for several years. I've renewed it once. They're good for 3. I have one that's good for 3 years, and I'm on my second renewal.
Okay. How often have you worked for Sheriff Ken Mascara, the St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office, in the past?
This is the first time.
Okay. How often have you worked for their attorneys?
I think this is about the 4th case they've asked me to look at.
In what sort of period?
2 years. I don't know exactly, but it's not 5 and it's not 1.
Okay.
I would say about 2 years.
And that's fine. Have you had your deposition taken before?
Yes.
Obviously, you're probably familiar enough with the rules that, if you're guessing or speculating, just let me know that, because otherwise I'll assume that it was, straight from memory and direct. And obviously we'll take turns speaking. Okay. What is your educational background?
So after finishing high school, I became a police officer 2 years out of high school, and I didn't pursue any post-secondary education at that time. Much later, and I don't remember exactly when, sometime around 1992, I was asked to teach at a college very near my home while I was working on the police department, and I started to teach there and learned that I could take college courses for like $25 a course, just one of the benefits of teaching at this school. So I started to pursue a general arts and science education at what is called Sheridan College in Brampton. And I got halfway through that when I had to stop taking courses. I had to actually quit taking a course because I had a very complex case when I was in the detective office. And then when I had time to get back towards my education, I had 2 young children in diapers. And then right after that, I got a job 100 miles away and moved. So consequently, when I looked at continuing my education where I currently live, it was very difficult to get any of the educational credits transferred. So I never really pursued anything there after that. And I also had a new job I had to learn. So in 2000 and 1, 2002, I started looking at going back to school, finishing the process. And someone I was working for had told me about a program at Royal Roads University on the west coast of Canada that would permit me to apply to a master's program without having an undergraduate, so long as I could prove a lifetime of experience in trying to learn, trying to further my education, and could demonstrate some competencies. I'd published a couple of articles by that time. I'd written a couple of textbooks, manuals for the college I work at, and applied and was accepted in 2003. Went to Royal Roads and fully disclosed that I did not have an undergrad, had not had finished anything like that. And they accepted me, and I graduated from Royal Roads in 2005. I actually got my degree in October of 2005. And so that's my educational background.
Okay. Royal Roads, help me with the roads part of the is that RH Roads or ROADS?
It's Royal Roads, as in ROADS.
Okay.
University.
Okay.
And it's on the tip of Vancouver Island in British Columbia.
I hear it's wonderful over there. Was there any component of that was, correspondence or distance learning?
There was, yes. I had to go out there for a residency period each year, but the vast majority was distance learning and asynchronous posting, they called it, where we actually put things on the internet and worked as cohorts. The second year was primarily focused on the research that we were required to do on getting our research proposal approved, getting the ethics approval from the University Ethics Board, and then starting the research, collecting the data, writing the paper, and then making sure it was submitted by August of 2005 on time.
Okay. What was your master's degree in?
It's called a Master of Arts in Leadership and Training. It's referred to as they refer to it as the MALT degree, M-A-L-T, and it's geared towards mid-career professionals as learners, but it helps you train and teach and lead other adults, other professionals, other people that you would work with.
Okay. Was there any component of that law enforcement based? Or was it?
It was a focus on justice and public safety. The cohort I was part of was primarily police officers, firefighters, paramedics. There was a couple of military people, and we had a few people from outside those general groups. But our work that we did at school on projects was generally focused towards public safety and leadership in those areas.
Is that a component of kind of Royal Roads curriculum? I mean, do they focus on first responder types or law enforcement?
Form.
They don't have not that I'm aware of. I don't know what the school's doing today. It's been 11 years, but like I said, there was what they call the classic MALT, and that was geared towards school teachers, administrators, people who would work in the healthcare industry, that sort of thing. And this was the Justice and Public Safety MALT, which was focused on firefighters, paramedics, police officers. People worked in prisons and jails, things of that nature. So there was a focus. But my understanding was that the university's emphasis was on their mid-career professional. They did have my recollection is there was about 2,500 to 3,000 undergrads that were on campus, but what I recall was that they were working towards a niche, which was that mid-career professional going back to school, had some prior learning, but it may have been somewhat dated in period. It was a wonderful experience. I learned an awful lot from it.
How many semesters or quarters, whatever they defined them, were you there? Did it take you?
We started in July. I remember having to do some work before I went out there for the first residency period, and that was in the month of July 2003. I recall it being August of 2003 for the first residency period, and then we went back in October to early November of 2004, and I had to have my major project, my paper, written and handed in by August of 2005 in order to, we had to apply for graduation so that we could convocate in that October.
The residency period, how long did you have to spend there?
It was, I recall it being around 3 weeks, 3 to 4. It was no more than 4. It certainly wasn't any less than 3. It was in that 21 working days. They worked us on weekends. I remember the first residency period I was out there, I spent about 15 minutes next to the pool once. It just wasn't any time. I couldn't believe how much work we actually accomplished when we were there.
And is that per semester or total, the 21 days or so?
Per residency period. We had 2 residency periods, and each one was about 3 weeks.
Okay.
The other malt was 5 weeks, but they recognized, from my understanding, that it was hard to get first responders to get that much time off in a row, so they had to accommodate the program so they could have a residency period, but not create barriers.
Any, other than kind of the continuing education classes and seminars, any other formal education after your tenure at Royal Roads?
No, I've just had gone to conferences and
certainly, and we'll get into
continuing education credits, that sort of stuff.
Certainly. What was your thesis or your paper on that you discussed?
Police response to excited delirium.
Summarize, like, kind of what the abstract, you know what I'm talking about, but the abstract, the kind of general summation of what your theory was that you were trying to prove or disprove?
What we're trying to do was find out, I'd done some work, a lot of work before I went to school, on the problem of sudden deaths following an altercation with police, especially the notion of positional asphyxia, taser, that sort of thing. And I started collecting information and talking to various experts around North America, and found out that the notion of these things, that tasers are responsible for the death, was very simplistic, and that there was quite a bit of complex physiology that was involved. So I put together a perspective on it, and I went to a number of medical people, and they said, yeah, there are all these other medical issues that are not even being considered. Then we wanted to see, okay, what do we know and what could we do to mitigate, if possible? Are there anything that we can think of? Because rather than talk to trainers, let's see if we can get different perspectives on it. So we had a focus group with a number of experts through the coroner's office in Ontario. I did a survey with an identified group of trainers across the province. I think there was about 85 people and I had a very high return rate on the survey to get their perspective on some questions. And then I interviewed a number of people who had experienced one of these events where somebody was out of control at the time and was restrained without any intent on using lethal force, and then there was a sudden and unexpected death. And that led to phone calls from others saying, hey, I had a guy that was in this state, but my guy didn't die. Do you want to talk to me? And that was one of the things that came out of it. It wasn't so much a thesis to prove or disprove, it was to explore. It was qualitative more than, it wasn't so much quantitative research. And what we came out with at the end of it was some directions where we could apply to training to educate the public and officers on this issue. We looked at an alternative restraint practice to try to mitigate the weight on someone's back. And we found that, I'm trying to think of the other one, there's some, the educational function. Is primarily around getting information, recognizing the event, and making sure that the officers recognize it in the field, and transitioning it from a police response to a medical response. Getting there's a name for them. Advanced care paramedics, if they were available, rather than just the lower tier, where they could give potentially an injection to slow down the person's physiology, slow down their ability to struggle, and then to make sure that they went in medical care and went to the hospital rather than going in the back seat of a police car and off to jail to be incarcerated, because there were a lot of physiological issues that would never be recognized by a police officer that you might be able to mitigate once they got to the emergency department. So it was really transitioning. That was the big thing, was transition this from a police call to a medical call and get medical expertise to the scene as soon as possible. That was the biggest feature that we came to.
Okay. Is it fair to say that paper was taser focused?
No.
Okay.
Not at all.
What other, I guess, uses of force did you focus on?
Didn't focus on any particular use of force. Okay. We included, there were cases that we had. I think I had a collection of around, and again, it was, what, 11 years, 12, almost 12 years ago. I think it was around 24 cases. It might have been 22, it might have been 28, in mid-20s that we had, and they had a variety of features. There were some, I think, that had pepper, but at the time that I collected my data, tasers weren't really being used in Ontario very broadly. They were doing a couple of field tests, so we didn't really have any taser-related deaths, so we couldn't focus on taser. But when I did the broader research and looked at other taser-related deaths, the backstory was almost identical. Whether a taser was used or not didn't seem to be the culminating factor. It just seemed to be part of the broader issue. It seemed these events seem to have the consistent backstory.
Okay. Was that paper published anywhere?
It's in the National Archives, the Canadian National Library.
Have you produced that in your materials?
No.
Okay. Is it available?
It's available, yeah.
Okay. If I request it, can you get me a copy?
You can get it through the National Archives.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Do you know?
I guess I could give you a copy if you wanted.
Thank you. What's your year of birth?
I'm sorry?
Your year of birth?
I was born in 58.
Tell me about your, I guess, police. Your vocation. Tell me about your vocational, I guess, experience after Royal Roads.
Well, no, what do you mean vocational experience?
Where else did you work after Royal Roads?
I didn't work at Royal Roads. I went to school there.
After your tenure at Royal Roads, where did you work after?
Let me object for him. He didn't work.
I understand. After your education at Royal
Right.
Roads, where did you work?
I've worked at the Ontario Police College, and then I continue to operate Elgin Security Consultants Inc. I started that company in 1992.
Okay. What does Elgin Security do?
Well, what does it do? It's a corporation that provides a structure for the work I do independent. So it was set up in 1992 to really train security guards in shopping centers, because there was no training for people at that time, and some businesses came to me and said, we require this for a number of reasons. You've done this sort of thing before. Would you be willing to help us? So I incorporated and started to do that. And then after I got to the police college in '96, I couldn't continue to do both. So after that, there was a period where I basically slowed everything down to a point where I wasn't doing anything. I gave my business away to other people, friends of mine that did that sort of thing. And for many years, it lay dormant. And then in 2005, 2006, somebody had asked me if I would assist with a matter, so I did it within that case, or that corporation for tax purposes, that sort of thing. And then in 2008, I think it was 2008, I was contacted and asked if I would participate in some training in England, and I was going to get paid for it. And I thought, okay, well then I'll do it again under this company. makes things simpler, that's all. And started to do that, and then after 2008, I began to get more and more requests for, would you come and assist with training outside of Ontario, outside of Canada, and presentations outside of Canada, and then would you be interested in helping with case evaluations? So since 2008, all of the work that I do has been done under Elgin Security Consultants. So when somebody calls me, like for this case, they don't actually hire Chris Lawrence, they're hiring the firm.
Certainly.
And then any checks that are written to that company. They go into a bank account, goes through the corporate process. I file tax returns in Canada and in the United States. I just do it that way.
Are there other consultants or employees of Elgin?
No.
Okay.
No, I'm not even really an employee. There are no employees. If I need, I bookkeepers and accountants are paid on a fee-for-service sort of thing. I do have attorneys, and I pay on retainer and then a fee-for-service, that sort of thing. But if there's no money left at the end of the year, I don't get any money. Okay. I only get a dividend if there's any money that results from it.
Do you know what you charged the sheriff's office in this case? The defendants?
I've kept track of the time. All I've received so far was a retainer check for $2,000, which is applied towards the work that's been done. I've kept track of it, and as I sit here without the notice, I don't remember exactly how much time it was, but I did indicate a summary of what's been, how many hours have been expended, and what days, that sort of stuff, and also the cost of the flight to come down here.
What have you done as we sit here today in this case?
I'm sorry?
What have you done as we sit here today? What have you done thus far in this case?
I've evaluated the material that was sent to me in my office at home in Ontario. I've made a couple of phone calls, or received a couple of phone calls from the attorney that I've worked with for the most part, Summer Branco. Wrote a report, and then prepared the material that was required for the disclosure so that you'd have a copy, sent that on the weekend. And I've flew down, drove to the airport, flew down here, and then today I went to the site to have a look around, orient myself, take a few photographs. And I did take a video, as you know, because it helps keep things straight. And that's been pretty much it.
Are you scheduled to go back today or tomorrow?
I'm sorry?
All right, when are you scheduled to go back?
I originally was going to go back today, but when they moved the deposition to late in the day, it would be very difficult to finish the deposition and also make the flights out tonight. I think the last flight's at 6 o'clock, so I'll be leaving tomorrow morning relatively early.
Are you working on any other cases for any other parties while you're down here?
No,
okay.
No.
What, do you know your percentage that you work for? Do you know the difference between a plaintiff and a defendant?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Do you know the percentages that Elgin works for plaintiffs versus defendants?
Okay, so when I work for Elgin, I don't advertise. I only, it's by word of mouth. I don't really know how people get a hold of me every time. So the majority of work that Elgin has done has been for defense, criminal and civil defense. I've done other work through the school, which is part of my duties, and sometimes that involves prosecution case. I've looked at a couple of things from as a result of being asked by plaintiffs, but the majority of work so far has been in defense.
Okay. How long have you been doing the legal consultation, kind of involvement in court cases? And by you, I mean Elgin.
Elgin? Well, the first time I was ever asked was 2005. I did one case, and then after that it was around, going by memory, maybe 2012. I don't think it was any earlier than that. It might have been a year or two later than that, but it would be on my CV when I've given any, actually done any work, so that would give a time frame.
Okay. Have you had any employment as law enforcement in the United States?
You mean as a sworn law enforcement officer?
Yes.
No.
Have you had any educational or training, formal education in the United States?
Meaning university or college?
Yes.
Yeah, no.
I assume you've had some continuing education seminars in the United States.
Many conferences, courses, yes, many.
Okay. And I'm going to go out of order somewhat, but while I'm thinking about it, help me understand the use of body cameras. Like, I have no knowledge of body camera use in Canada. Can you give me some edification about if they're used, how often they're used, how prevalent they're used?
It's an evolving process. It's something that's only come up in the last few years. I know the city of Toronto, their police department has just did a major study that they've released. It's not peer-reviewed, but it was done. It was well done, and they're making a decision on how extensive their body camera use will be in the future. My understanding is they want to make it fairly pervasive. Other organizations are beginning to look at it. It hasn't been that extensive in the past, but it seems to be growing. But I can't tell you what everybody is planning on doing, but I do know that it is increasing.
And some kind of the underlying part of my question you've answered, which is kind of an understanding of, is it a, much like it is here, kind of a municipality by municipality decision up there as well?
Pretty much.
Okay.
Because it'll be the municipality that has to fund it, as opposed to another layer of government saying, imposing it, because that as people are beginning to look at these issues, they're realizing how, while it's a great idea, it's going to be expensive, and it sometimes is. There's a lot of things that people don't realize, a lot of costs that come up, and that causes some to reconsider, but some are going ahead.
Have you had any coursework on the U.S. Constitution?
Coursework through conferences, yes. There's a number of attorneys that routinely present on the U.S. Constitution, constitutional law.
Is there a summary of that in any of your materials?
No. Objection form summary of what?
Of his coursework related to the U.S. Constitution?
Not specifically to the Constitution. Often at a conference that I've gone to a number of occasions, it's called ILETA, International Law Enforcement Educators and Trainers Association. There's a couple of attorneys that routinely update with constitutional law at that conference. I've also subscribed to a number of entities that send updates through the email, Eric Daigle being one of them. He's with the legal officer section with the International Association of Chiefs of Police. He will come out every couple of months with a summary of various circuit decisions and any Supreme Court decisions that might come out. I look those over.
Certainly. Help me understand, when were you last employed as a law enforcement officer?
The end of December 1995.
Okay. When were you first employed as a law enforcement officer?
June of 1979.
What type of work did you do within law enforcement?
I walked the beat, drove a police car in general patrol. I spent 5 summers on the police marine unit on Lake Ontario, policing the waterways on Lake Ontario and the Credit River. At the same time, I was part of the underwater search and recovery unit by coincidence rather than design. And that was on an ads and needs basis 12 months of the year, but the summer job was basically during the warm weather months from April till November. I spent 2 years as a station duty officer responsible for the booking and holding cells at my police department's headquarters. At the time, there's about 1,000 sworn members, 4 divisions. And if I wasn't working in station duty, I was acting as a supervisor on the road because I was qualified as a sergeant at the time. At the end of that period of station duty, I was asked to go full-time on our tactical and rescue unit, the SWAT team. And I did that from 1989 until 1992. And I went from the tactical unit to the Criminal Investigation Bureau at 21 Division. and worked in the general assignment section of Criminal Investigation Bureau. And then I went back on the road at 21 Division. I can't remember exactly when. Probably about 94, probably 94. And then at the end of 1995, I resigned my position at the police department because I had to give it up in order to become a member of the public service to work at the police college, because the college I work at is run by the government. So I had to go from a city employee to a provincial employee. So it's not a compatible position. I've been there ever since.
You indicated some degree of incompatibility. Is it, again, this is my trying to understand the different systems. Can you do both, or is there some sort of prohibition?
There's kind of a way. So we use what's called, the police college uses what's called a seconded officer. They're borrowed from their police service, but the contract in place for the people who work full-time says that it can only be for a maximum, I think, of 2 years and then a 1-year potential extension. At that end of period of time, we get currency from the road by bringing people in with experience, and when they get 2 or 3 years of intense instructive opportunities, plus they're updated in the latest because we have to keep up with everything that's going on around in policing, and then when they go back to the street, the entity gets back a very good trainer with lots of experience, and then we get new people. So you can come for a period of time if you're what is referred to as seconded, like seconded. Otherwise, you have to give up your employment with the police agency that you work for, the police service you work for, and then join the public service, and then you will become what's called a permanent or full-time instructor at the college.
Okay.
And then you stay there until you retire, ideally.
How many occasions did you have while as active law enforcement to use deadly force?
Well, I didn't use deadly force when I was on the road.
Let me ask that a different way. Have you ever had an occasion to use deadly force?
No.
Have you ever had an occasion to essentially fire at someone which resulted in something less than deadly force?
No, I never fired at a person when I was a police officer. I've never fired a live round at a human being.
Okay. Is that it? Let me ask that question. You said you've never fired a live round at a human being. Is that in your life overall, meaning personal and professional?
Well, I was in the Reserve Army, and we fired blanks at each other all the time. But I never fired a live round at a person while I was a member of the Armed Forces. Okay. And that was as a reservist. As a police officer, I've shot a lot of animals for humane reasons. They've been hit by a car, they're rabid animals. So I fired my gun, but under those sorts of circumstances, I pointed my gun at people. I was a designated marksman when I was on the SWAT team, so I had to do that job with the .308 rifle. Right. But I've been fortunate in that while I have pointed my gun at somebody and I have knew that in the next few moments, if the person doesn't comply, I may have to use lethal force, I've been fortunate enough where I've not actually had to shoot at somebody. Now, from a training perspective, I've fired simunition, paint rounds, wax rounds. I've fired it at a lot of people, and I've had those fired back at me, but that's training. Okay. That's not on the actual road. So that's what I mean by not firing a live round at a human being.
Thank you. You'll agree with me, will you not, that kind of the federal civil rights law, the use of force rules in America are encoded in the U.S. Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and case law which interprets those?
I would agree that's correct.
Okay. And then there's some, certainly some municipal or both city, state, and federal law that also regulates that.
Yes.
Okay. How? And again, this is kind of coming from a complete place of ignorance admittedly. What I want to understand is how is it encoded, or how does the law, as it relates to use of force, encoded or written in Canada?
You pretty much answered your own question. So Graham versus Connor and Tennessee versus Garner are encoded in Section 25 of the Canadian Criminal Code.
Okay.
The concepts are the same. We have the same protections in the Canadian Constitution that you have in the United States Constitution, with a couple of exceptions, and they're, in my view, relatively minor. Your Second Amendment right in this country, we don't have anything like that. We don't have the right to bear an arm. You can apply, and it's more of a privilege to carry or to have a firearm in Canada. Your Third Amendment to the Constitution is the right to refuse to billet soldiers in your residence during peacetime. We don't have anything like that. It's not something we need. But the right to a fair trial, the right to cross-examine witnesses, the right to a speedy trial, the right to be free of unreasonable search and seizure without due process, the right to be free of cruel and unusual punishment, the right to be informed of your rights under the Constitution, they're embraced in the very same manner. So you have Miranda down here. You have to read Miranda rights. You have to read the person their rights to a lawyer as part of a constitutional right that's written into the Constitution. So the results are the same. The mechanisms are different.
Okay.
You would call it, for example, here's how it kind of works. You call it a misdemeanor. We call it a summary conviction offense. You call it a felony. We call it an indictable offense. You refer to it as a Terry stop. We refer to the procedure as investigative detention. It's really the same process, and it's what did the officer reasonably perceive at the time of the event, given the context and circumstances as they understood it, not what do you find out after the fact. So it's very parallel between the United States and Canada in respect to how it's evaluated.
Isn't the lack of a Second Amendment, though, a significant difference as it relates to law enforcement response?
Formal.
Not particularly. So really what the difference is, the major difference in my view, is there is less of a likelihood that a traffic stop will involve a firearm in Canada than there is in the United States. Because in Canada, getting a handgun is very difficult to have to drive around with. And if you do get one, then it's going to have to be unloaded, it has to have a trigger lock, it has to be secured, the ammunition has to be secured separately. So the ability to simply say, well, I've got a gun on my hip and a concealed weapons permit is very rare in Canada, where in the United States, people can get those. So the potential for a firearm to be involved is different, the opportunity. But the procedures for traffic stops, the procedures for interactions with subjects, they're basically the same. When I go to a training course in the United States, it transfers very simply to the sorts of experience and work that I have done in the past in Canada. There's not much difference.
Is there the equivalent of the Castle Doctrine in Canada? Do you understand the concept of the Castle Doctrine?
I don't understand it by name.
Okay. It's kind of the
Manchino's castle? I'm sorry.
We got to take turns. Essentially, the right, does a Canadian citizen have the right to have a firearm at home?
They do.
Without is there any sort of approval or registration of that?
You have to have a personal acquisition license to acquire a firearm, and that's a federal process. But once you have that, you can go and buy a rifle or a shotgun for hunting, one that you'd use for hunting. And you can keep that in your residence, you just have to keep it safely.
Can you have a pistol or a handgun in your residence in Canada?
You can.
How?
You have to get a personal acquisition license, and then you have to take a safety course, and then you have to apply for a restricted weapons permit, and you then can buy certain weapons that fit within certain criteria. You can't buy for example, you can't buy a firearm with a 2-inch barrel. You can buy a firearm with a 4-inch barrel or longer. That's a handgun, but it must be kept safely.
What does that mean under Canadian standards? What is kept safely?
Well, they don't want ammunition to be in the gun. They want the gun to be unloaded and the ammunition to be kept separate. And they want the gun to be locked up in a secure location, so that if somebody gets angry quickly, it's not at your fingertips kind of idea.
Okay. Did you bring any, I don't know if I can't remember if I asked, did you bring any documents with you today?
I did. I brought the originals of the documents you have copies of.
Okay. Where is that?
They're in my briefcase in the other part of the room.
Very good.
Just for the record, I recently got I don't recall if it was a deposition or it was a statement from the lady who made the phone call. I was only given that the other day, so that's not on the list of documents I've reviewed. But I don't think there's anything that I have reviewed that isn't on that list of documents other than that one item.
Fair enough. So you would basically, of the materials you reviewed, there would be one more statement.
Yes.
And certainly the inspection today would be something at least additional that you performed.
Correct.
What significance, if any, did the inspection today have?
Generally, what my experience has been doing site visits are, and I don't think anybody does this intentionally, it's just the way it works. I get a perspective that was taken by the camera, and when I go to the actual site visit, distances seem to be closer than what they appeared on the picture. So I find it helpful to go to see what the relationship is between, like today, the front door and that garage. How far apart are they really? Where on that garage really are they? Because you get a picture. People say a picture's worth 1,000 words. I think the visit actually does more than just. It adds meaning to those photographs, much more meaning to the photograph. It gives me a good idea of relative size and distance.
Is there any intent as we sit here today to amend your report based upon the site visit today? Any opinions changed?
I don't think so. Not as I sit here. I don't think there's anything that's going to change in my report. There's things I understand better, but I don't think it changes my opinion.
What do you understand better?
Where Mr. Hill would have had to have been standing in order to be struck by those rounds, how far over to the one side he would be. I thought those holes in the door were a little bit more towards center. It was helpful to see that how far over to the one side they were. That was helpful. The layout of the house and how the officers would have come in the house after they did the entry, it was very confusing because I had no sense of what flow those pictures would have been taken in. They were just kind of taken. I don't know if this one was before that one. So that's one of the reasons I took the video and walked through the house, was to help me remember what the relationship of rooms were.
Why didn't you attempt to open the door or close the garage door with one arm?
I don't think I needed to. I think I understand how it could be done, but I also didn't want to damage the residents, and I didn't want to upset the lady I believe to be Mr. Hill's mother. I was sensitive to the fact that she was a little distraught today, and I just thought a lot of banging and crashing wouldn't help. So it was in deference to her, number one. Number two, I don't think, I could have done it, but it would have made an awful racket, and I just didn't think it was going to be necessary.
You'll agree with me for purposes of today that you did not attempt to open or close that garage door with one arm?
I did. I stood inside and I did try to close the door with one arm, and I did try to open it from the inside with one arm. But I didn't slam it down because I didn't want to upset, and I apologize if it's not her correct name. I didn't want to upset Mrs. Hill, Gregory's mother. If that's not her name, I apologize. But
Mrs. Bryant, but
Her name
there
is
you
what?
Bryant.
Bryant. That's what I mean. I
That's
can't keep everybody's name correct, but I didn't want to upset. I didn't want to upset his mother, and I didn't want to cause any damage either.
Okay. Have you listened to the music that was allegedly playing on the day in question?
Now, what do you mean by that?
Have you listened to the songs that were allegedly playing? There's a CD
Right.
that I think we'd all generally agree was playing at the time.
Okay. I did not hear. I never got a copy of the CD, so
Okay.
I don't know what was playing, but I could hear music on the 8-hour long audio recording that I was asked to listen to. Was the channel the officers were talking on. I could hear some music in the background, but I can't make out any. I don't know who it's by. I don't know what song it is. I don't know anything about it.
Did you hear anything that rang to you as obscene?
I couldn't make out enough of it from the recording that I had.
Why didn't you try the stereo today?
I thought about it. Again, I didn't want to upset anybody. I didn't want to crank the music up. The school's across the street. I'm not here as an expert in sound. I believe that you can hear on there, but that'll be for the triers of fact to really make a decision. My opinion doesn't turn on the volume or something of that nature, so I didn't really think it was necessary today.
Would volume be relevant to what would volume of the music be relevant to what could be heard by any of the parties involved in the shooting?
It might be. It might be.
Okay.
But you could. My suggestion would you'd ask the people that were there what they heard and what they couldn't hear.
Okay. Northeast, south, or west, or some other direction. Do you know, based upon your inspection today, or based upon your inspection today, what is your opinion of what direction Mr. Hill was facing at the time he was shot?
What direction he was facing?
Yes.
I believe he was facing towards that door, towards the door, flush with the opening and closing of the door.
Do you know whether that's northeast, south, or west, or some subpart?
As I sit here, I may be incorrect, but I think north was towards the left. But I would have to go back. I'm not 100% certain in my mind as I sit here right now. I've gone to Google Earth and done the overhead view to try to figure out north, south, east, and west. As I sit here, I just can't recall precisely which direction it is.
The direction on a compass, do you know which direction either of the officers were facing, either Officer Newman or Lopez?
My recollection is that Lopez was standing kind of northwest, facing in towards the garage and up towards the corner, and Newman was more towards the front door, had been to the front door and had moved back. So he was facing, north. So he was facing, that's north, east, north, south, west. Like I said, using the compass, I'm not exactly sure which direction is north, which direction is south. But the garage was off to Newman's right, and Lopez, facing the door, was more to the right of the door. So the majority of the door was in front of Lopez and to his left.
Do you know where the sun was in the sky at the time of the shooting?
It was at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, so it would have been to the south and to the west, but relative to where the house is sitting, I'm not 100% certain.
Okay. In your report, you indicate Deputy Newman was not able to hear whether or not Mr. Hill or Deputy Lopez said anything due to the loud music playing in the garage.
Now say that again.
Deputy Newman was not able to hear whether or not Mr. Hill or Deputy Lopez said anything due to the loud music playing in the garage.
That's what Newman claimed.
Okay. How far apart was, at the time of the shooting, how far apart, in your estimation, was Mr. Hill from Deputy Lopez?
I'm not certain because Lopez, his explanation wasn't clear in the record as to whether he was 4 feet away from the garage or 14 feet away from the garage. It wasn't clear, but he'd said he had moved down the driveway from the position he was standing, and at some point he was close enough. He said he tapped on the garage with either his closed hand or his open hand. I can't remember which. And then he said he took a couple steps back, and when the door opened up, he stepped back a couple more steps, but he was never definitive as to how far back that was.
How far away was Deputy Newman from Mr. Hill at the time of the shooting?
Well, again, Deputy Newman had gone to the door and then somewhere had come back between the door and the edge of the driveway. So the angle of the defects on the door that I looked at seemed to line up with a point in front of the light that was on the front lawn. And if you extended the line from the defects in the door to in front of that light to a concrete pole on the opposite side of the road in front of the school, that gives you a general direction of alignment with the bullet holes. So Newman would have knocked on the door, closed the door, and then taken a couple of steps back, and I think more kind of towards the door. But precisely where he was, I can't say.
Have you testified as an expert in any American court of laws to bullet trajectory or forensics of bullets being fired?
I testified.
Go ahead.
Sorry, did you?
I made an objection to form, but you're going to answer.
Okay. I testified in a case in Utah where a woman was shot in the head, and I talked about those sorts of things, but I didn't do a shooting reconstruction. I testified in a case in Alabama, a federal civil case, on an incident where a man was shot in the hand by a municipal officer, a police officer. Those are the two cases where I've testified in court, and I've testified at a number of depositions in relation to shootings.
Okay.
So bullets have been part of it.
Certainly. To continue my questioning from before, do you know how far apart Deputy Newman and Deputy Lopez were from each other at the time of shooting?
Not precisely, no.
Okay. Given your inspection today, do you have an opinion whether the music or noise or whatever coming from the speakers would have been louder from inside the garage or outside the garage?
I wouldn't know that.
Okay.
Would you mind if we took a break for
I don't
just a
mind at
couple
all.
moments?
Completely
I just want to get a drink of water.
Off the record, 159. Back on the record, 106 or 206.
You do some analysis, sir, on the timing on a service Glock, I guess, as to kind of what can be done. Do you have any specific analysis that you've performed on this case as to the timing of the sequencing of shots?
On this particular case, maybe I'm not understanding your question, but I agree with the sequencing that everybody seems to think happened, which was the first shot was the lower one, the next, because the door was coming down. That's logical. I think that's consistent.
Okay. As far as the timing, how far apart they were, do you have any opinions?
Yeah, using experienced police officers, the research suggests, and I've confirmed this independently by timing experienced officers myself on an actual range with a camera at 30 frames a second, someone firing a pistol like a Glock, the time frames for shot cadence, if you will, the time between shots would be helpful for the jury and the court to understand that 0.2 to 0.3 is a relatively reasonable amount of time for an experienced officer to cycle the weapon. The quickest I've ever seen 2 shots ever fired by anybody was 0.12, and I've only seen that once. So are there anomalies? There might be, but generally the time is there to illustrate or assist the triers of fact in understanding how rapid this may have been, how quickly the door might have come down, how rapidly the shots might have been fired, what was the duration of this event, so that they can then understand the evidence.
Is it a reasonable, based upon that analysis, is it a reasonable assumption that the 4 shots would have taken about between 1/5 and 1/3 of a second each, or between each?
That's a reasonable number that everybody could be guided by. I don't think there's, it's unlikely that it was 0.5, and it's very unlikely that it was 0.1, but 0.2 to 0.3 is pretty good.
In your inspection today, did you see any of the blood matter, skull matter, or brain matter on the door itself?
I saw something on the inside of the door, yes. I don't know exactly what it was.
Where did you see whatever you saw?
Higher on the wall, on the inside of the door, near where the defects on the door were.
At the highest shot or at other shots?
I didn't really look in great detail. I was making sure I was looking for the bullet wipe on the defects. I was looking for more the weight of the door, that sort of thing. I knew that it had been there from the photographs. It was pretty apparent there, so I didn't really look to see if it was still there or if it had deteriorated. So I don't know to what extent.
Okay. The wipe, is that kind of how the bullet hits the door and the impression that it leaves?
Yeah.
Help me. What is the wipe?
Objection.
Fair.
Sorry.
What is wipe?
So there's something that's known as bullet wipe on an entry of a bullet through a medium. In this case, when a bullet is fired, there is even though people try to clean the barrel of their weapon, there's going to be some fouling that's in there. There's also soot and unburned powder and that's picked up with the bullet, because the bullet's actually a little bit smaller than the barrel. That's so that it fits in with the lands and grooves and starts to turn and twist as it comes out. As it comes out, the bullet has some soot, some unburned powder, some oil, grease, things like that nature on it. As it's spinning through the air, once it strikes an object, in this case that door, as it's turning, depending on whether it's right twist or left twist, it's going to hit the door, and there's going to be a ring, like a collar, left that tells you which direction it came from. And despite the time that there's been between the incident and today, and despite the elements that the door's been exposed to, there's still evidence of that bullet wipe on the leading edge of the door. So I looked to see if it was still there. I was interested if it would last that long, and on that door it actually did.
The bullet impressions to me almost have a kind of a snow cone-ish shape. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
There's a round part, and then there's
Yeah.
almost a triangular part.
Right.
What causes the triangular part?
I couldn't tell you. That's a physical thing, but
Okay.
that's typical. The bullet wipe will tell you which end. Besides, the other thing to consider is one of those rounds, one round hit between two portions of a bracket that support the door and allow it to articulate, and was trapped in there. So it could only come from one direction. It couldn't come from the other direction. Right. The other next one, I think it was the second shot. The bracket on the door is fixed, so there is the pieces are inside. That's the part that trapped the first shot. The next shot, if the back of my hand, let's say that's the edge of the door, forget my wrist, there's a bullet that actually almost touched that, it had to be going this way, because if it was going this way, it would have hit that. And then secondarily, there was one of the bullets went through Mr. Hill and hit the concrete wall that was behind it. And that alignment with one of those defects on the concrete and one of the defects on the door, they're not in exact alignment. And that's not unusual for a bullet to slightly change and deviate, because it will tumble as it goes through the body. It hit the wall there. So that tells me that those shots, the bullet wipe, the way it went through the door, the mechanisms that it had to, I don't want to say navigate, but pass by or pass through, are all consistent with shots being fired from the position that Deputy Newman was in.
Do we agree on the point that the door was coming down as the officer was firing?
I'm sorry, objection form.
The garage door was, I believe the garage door was on its way down as the bullets were passing through.
Okay. Do you have an opinion as to how far the garage door was off the ground when the highest,
The first round?
I guess the last round struck through the door?
What would be helpful to know, and it's one of the reasons I went, I wanted to know if there was any elevation change between the front door and the sidewalks, so to speak. And was there a decline there? And I guess given that it's Florida and you don't have any ski hills here, it isn't surprising to find out that ground was fairly level there. So even if you took 2 steps back, Officer Newman, I don't think would have lowered, wouldn't have gone down a hill, so to speak. So he would be firing at a consistent position at each time. So you'd have to know how high the firearm was when Deputy Newman believed he was firing it. And then you could make some determination, because if you knew how high the pistol was, then you could basically take 2 pieces of paper, mark from the bottom of the paper up to that height, and then in a straight line, basically, and then put another piece of paper with the numbers marked on the other side and put the 2 together. I was playing with this, but I can't conclusively state anything because I don't know how high the pistol was, and I didn't know at the time I was doing this whether that was level ground or not level ground. Just getting an idea. That would give you a sense of where that door was. But Mr. Hill was 6'1". I'm about 6'3", and I stood behind the door in that position, and my head would have to be forward. So either Mr. Hill would have to lean forward for that final round to strike him if the door was completely closed, or if the door was up, that would permit Mr. Hill to still be standing up, somewhat relative, because I'm not exactly the same height he is, and I don't know what posture he had adopted as a result of the first 2 rounds that struck him.
Okay.
So it was either closed or near closed, but I can't say for certain how much it was open.
Did you see a water hose in the garage?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Did you see a water hose in the garage?
A water hose in the garage? Not that I recall.
Did you see let me ask this. In Canada, the spray nozzle that attaches to a water hose, what's that called?
Nozzle?
Okay, fair enough. Kind of saw that coming. Did you see one of those in the garage?
I wasn't looking for a hose. I was looking at the garage door, the relationship between the door and the other interior door of the residence, the height of I wasn't inspecting the contents of the garage.
Those 2 items that are common in a garage.
Sorry?
Are those 2 items that are common in a garage?
I've got an interior hose inside my garage in Canada, and it's got a spray attachment on the end of it.
Are you aware that Mr. Hill's daughter saw all of these events?
No.
Have you read her deposition?
No, I haven't.
I'll tell you, you hadn't because it hadn't been taken.
No, they were very young children.
Did you read the depositions of the other witnesses, the eyewitnesses?
I read depositions from teachers across the street, and I read depositions from relatives who were nearby and came afterwards, but that's pretty much what I had.
Other than Officer Newman and Officer Lopez, did you read any deposition or any statement that put a gun in Mr. Hill's hand at any point?
I recall members from the SWAT team after the entry, some commented on a gun in the pocket, but not everyone did. But that's it. There were only police depositions and information that touched on that topic.
And the converse is true too, that there were SWAT members that actually didn't see a gun in Mr. Hill's dead body.
Correct.
Form.
Would it be important to secure a firearm, particularly one that may be involved with a crime, as a part of an investigation?
Generally, yes.
Okay. You know why that wasn't done here initially?
I can understand why it wasn't done.
Why?
Well, when you're a tactical officer, you're not an investigator, and you don't want to foul up a criminal investigation. Your job really as a SWAT member in this circumstance is to make an entry and make sure that the house is clear, nobody else needs assistance, and that there's no further danger. As far as moving evidence is concerned, I understand why Mr. Hill's body would have been moved to check on his circumstance, his state, whether they could do anything. After that, as a SWAT officer, I would not be touching or moving evidence if I could avoid it. Now, there's exigent circumstances where it must be done, but in this case, there was no one else in the house, and I don't think it really needed to be done. In respect to the two that were checking the body, they would have one perspective. The others would be farther back, and their jobs would basically be what's called long cover. They would be looking for other threats while two people are focusing on this. They're kind of scanning the background to see if anything sudden comes up as a risk, because that's their job. Their job isn't to attend down here. So the fact that two other people back here didn't see it, I would understand how that could happen, because I've been in that sort of situation. Documenting it, as a member of a tactical and rescue unit or a SWAT team, generally you will do a broad stroke, we call them gun sheets on our team. You know, we're called to this type of an event, these are the resources used, this is the amount of time we were there, this is a broad stroke of what took place, this is the occurrence number. We'll make some basic notes. I came, I saw, I left, I did this, and if I touched any evidence, I'd make a note. But you're not supposed to impact the scene so that criminal investigators can then come in, and in this case, yeah, they're going to secure the firearm, they're going to identify it, they're going to photograph it, and you don't want to have to explain how much you moved it.
Do you know if pictures were taken before an officer rolled him over to see if there was a gun in his hand?
I don't know. My recollection of this was they couldn't get the robot started. They made a determination that according to the after-action report, they made a determination that they needed to go in to check for, there's a variety of reasons for going in. So they used the gas for the house to increase the safety. Then they went in. The probe was placed in the door, I believe, prior to the team entering from the back, but I don't know precisely when the photographs were taken. As I sit here, I don't precisely know when the photographs were taken.
Okay. Do you have any opinions, or I guess
And can I just clarify?
sure.
That's I'm talking about the photographs that were taken by the robot.
Right.
Obviously, the crime scene photographs were taken much later.
Certainly. Do you have any opinions? Well, strike that. Do you have any medical training?
Nothing beyond a first responder.
Okay. Do you have any opinions on what Mr. Hill would be able to do or not do with a level of intoxication above 0.3?
Just my experience as a police officer, and that depends on the individual. I've seen people that blew very high in the 0.3 range, and I was surprised that they're people with experienced drinking backgrounds. They didn't seem to be affected by much. And at the other end, I've seen people with relatively low concentrations have great difficulties. So it depends on the individual. There's no way you can say without knowing the person.
In what kind of education or training do you have in the forensic science related to the effects of alcohol on biomechanics or body mechanics?
Other than just my experience, no formal training, but other than just my experience with people who are intoxicated in my duties.
Related to the nature of the head injury, the bullet that struck the head.
Right.
Do you have any opinions regarding what level of mental incapacitation that would have caused?
Only what I referred to in the report that I wrote, and that comes from the literature around wounding, because we use it to inform our training, and that is that unless the brain stem is involved traumatically, or unless the spine is severed at a particular spot, the person may be able to function for a period of time, but then that capacity and that time frame varies. But death is not always instantaneous, and people may be able to move for a period of time following that. But again, that's just what the literature talks about. And as a trainer, we make sure that police officers understand that unless you see them fall or they give up or say they're giving up, that one or two shots may not incapacitate an individual.
Are we in agreement that if the gun, I guess Kel-Tec gun, was either not in Mr. Hill's possession or in his pocket at all times, that this would have been an improper use of force?
4, go ahead.
If Mr. Hill didn't have a pistol, then the perception of the officers was flawed. If if the pistol was in Mr. Hill's pocket the entire time and he made no effort to retrieve the pistol or move in a manner consistent with retrieving the pistol and apparently getting prepared to fire, then lethal force should not have been used.
Okay. Do you have an opinion related to, or have you expressed any opinions related to the lack of any body or blood matter, blood splatter, residue, gunpowder, or any real foreign matter on the Kel-Tec?
Objection form.
I'm not a blood spatter expert. I did make some review to see if I could learn anything from it, because I saw that your expert had made a comment on that. But if the gun is behind somebody, I don't know how that impairs, because I don't know exactly how the blood erupts. I'm not an expert in that particular area, so I didn't put any opinion of that nature in my report.
Okay. Did you take, I assume you reviewed the depositions of Officer Newman and Officer Lopez?
Yes.
Did you see comments about Fort Pierce being in decline or being a bad area or comments of kind of similar nature?
Form, go ahead.
I wouldn't characterize it as it's a bad area. It seemed to be that the comment was, yeah, it was an aging part of the community. It was an older part of the community. Houses, need to be updated, renovated. It's an older section of town. That sort of thing. Yes.
Did you see anything which arose to the level of racial bias?
Form, go ahead.
In my view, no.
Anything that arose to the level of
Can you speak up, please?
sorry, anything that arose to the level of racial prejudice, prejudging?
Form,
No, I wouldn't say racial prejudice, no.
Okay. Have you conducted any studies on? I mean, strike that. I'm certain you've heard of this whole Black Lives Matter type movement and the strife between African American citizens of the United States and law enforcement.
They have a Black Lives Matter chapter in Toronto.
Do they?
Yeah.
Have you done any studies related to kind of the interplay of bias, prejudice, and the use of force?
form,
I'm aware that there is training that's being offered in the United States, and it's being funded out by, I believe, a government entity, but I can't tell you which one, in relation to bias-free policing. And that is a perspective that is being held out, that there is a history of bias that has to be encountered. There's some research done by some Harvard professors that say that everybody has an inherent bias, and I get that. So I'm aware of it, and I know about it. I'm not an expert in it.
Okay.
I don't teach it, but I'm familiar with it.
Okay. If the Kel-Tec found on the scene in Mr. Hill's possession was not in his hand, would there have been an imminent deadly force to Officer Newman, Officer Lopez, or any other individual?
form,
It would depend on the context. If nobody knew it was in his pocket, and then how would the officers know that that he had the weapon? But if it's in his pocket and his hand's going back towards it, and they know it's in his pocket, it could be, because it wouldn't take very long to produce that. But if it's not apparent, if they don't know he has it, and it happens to be in his pocket, there's no way they would know that that potential would be imminent.
I'm not picking on you for this next question. I know in some jurisdictions it is. Is sheriff spelled differently in Canada?
I have a friend who spells his name differently than the sheriff, and it creeps in every time, and I try to catch it in my proofreading. No, it's not supposed to be spelled differently.
Okay. Two R's and two F's is incorrect.
There was somebody I worked with that had that name
Fair
spelled
enough.
that way, and it comes out every now and again. I apologize.
I do it too, so. Is it legal in the United States for somebody to go to their own front door with a firearm in hand?
form,
That's a question of law.
Which is why I objected.
To the extent you're basing opinions on it. What is your understanding of the law as it relates to the ability of a person to go to the front door with a firearm in their hand in the United States?
My understanding, at least for Florida is concerned, I understand that you have a stand your ground statute which would permit Mr. Hill to go to the front door with a gun in his hand.
The type of shooting exhibited by this officer through a garage door, is that in accord with police training?
Form.
We don't encourage shooting through a medium if that's avoidable. And I don't know anybody who actually has a barrier that slides out while shots are being fired. But I think what you're dealing with here is more along the line of it takes time to react, and in that time things have changed before you can stop and realize objectively, oh, I have a different set of circumstances. I think this whole, from the time of the first shot to the last shot, you're talking about a second.
Do you know how many seconds would have passed from the time there was the, I guess, perception of a firearm in Mr. Hill's possession to the point of firing?
I have an estimation based on the visit today. It would be maybe 2, maybe 3 seconds. You know, it may be a second or two more. It certainly wouldn't be, I don't think it would be 1 second, but it's going to be that 2, 3, maybe 4 seconds. This was a relatively rapidly evolving event.
Do you agree that by closing the garage door, Mr. Hill was de-escalating the situation?
Form.
In retrospect, that may be exactly what happened.
Did Lisa McGuire, did you review the deposition of Lisa McGuire?
Is that the lady that made the phone call, or is that the teacher, one of the teachers?
I'll defer to your judgment. Well, let me just ask you this way. Lisa McGuire, Donna Hellums, Hellums,
Yes.
Stephanie Mills, Shirley Fowler, Elizabeth Enrique Ruiz, did any of those individuals see a gun in Mr. Hill's hand?
I can't say specifically what each one of them saw, but the general tone was that the civilian witnesses did not really see what happened. They noticed the garage door go up. They saw, some of them noticed that the deputies seemed startled. Some heard shots, some did not, but nobody really saw much of Mr. Hill.
Couldn't the act of a garage door just going up suddenly be a startling event?
Form.
It may, but you know, a garage door going up when you're knocking on it in and of itself shouldn't have really startled an officer. You're knocking on the door, you're expecting a door to open at some point.
What do you agree with the statement, deadly force is never used as a compliance technique or an arrest technique?
Form.
Well, I agree that it should not be used as a compliance technique. It may be part of an arrest outcome, but you know, the intent really is to defend or stop a threat as opposed to effect an arrest. The arrest may follow.
You agree that the use of force is not...
Sorry, could you speak up?
Sorry. You agree that the use of force is not guesswork?
No, it's not.
Form.
It's not guesswork.
What do you mean by that? Or what does that mean?
Well, you asked me
I know.
to agree. You know, you take the action based on your perception of the events and what you think is necessary, rather than, let's see how this works.
Is shooting through a closed garage door exactly, let's see how this works?
Well,
I'm sorry, form.
I don't agree with it in this situation, because the door was coming down at a time when the officers are they've made a decision based on what they see. It's going to take time for their actions to occur, and in that time frame, circumstances are rapidly changing faster than the officer can keep up with, and it's like you react in the past, you take action in the present, and your results will be in the very near future, and you end up with these types of unfortunate events. But it's because everything is happening so fast, and to sit and wait to see what happens invites the potential for, in the perception of the officers, a person with a pistol who opened the door and seems to have pointed it at a uniformed deputy. To wait until the shots are fired means that you're taking a chance on being shot first and not taking action.
I stood on the other side of the door from you during the inspection, as did Mr. Jolly at one point. Do you know when Officer Lopez or Officer Newman would have been, I guess, visibly identifiable as an officer of the law?
Form.
I'd have to go. I wasn't looking at it from that perspective when I was there. I was interested in other things, but I thought about it, and they don't have stripes on their pants. We generally have stripes on pants of officers in Canada, so you wouldn't have an opportunity really to see until you could at least see their waistband. And it wouldn't matter how far open the door was, as much as the door and the ability of Mr. Hill to see out. And I noticed that the door would go up relatively simply to a point, and then it seemed to bind a little bit. If you wanted it opened it a bit more, you had to lift it a little harder again, almost a second effort. So if the first one stopped, then you'd have to lean down to look out the door. But they would be visible potentially by the basket weave of their uniform, arguably by the color of their trousers and shirt. But again, it's just a green color. You wouldn't really be able to precisely determine who was there until you could see the star on the chest, the emblems on the shoulders, that sort of thing. Then it should be clear by that point. But I would think you'd get some indication, at least if you lived in the area and knew how they dressed, you'd see the basket weave of the belt. That might be enough.
Do we agree that neither officer, or really anyone, has indicated that the gun was pointed at them?
My recollection was that Newman said something about the gun at the height of the hip when he started to fire. And I can't remember exactly how he said it, but Lopez said something to the effect that the gun was pointing at him and he thought he was going to get shot.
And the facts are what they are, but as I recall, they were toward and raising in the direction of. Do you recall that one way or the other?
I believe that was what Newman had said. But my recollection, as I sit here today, was Lopez said something to the effect that as the gun came up, it was coming up and pointing towards me. I don't think, based on his explanation and my recollection, I don't think he believed that the gun was in that fashion, but the gun had certainly come up in this fashion, meaning, for the record, arm bent and then the barrel parallel to the floor with the muzzle pointing in his direction. Towards his direction.
And again, we don't use hindsight in these cases, but having,
Sure we do.
well,
That's what everybody does.
it would be consistent with that second effort you were talking about, kind of needing two hands to get the door down the rest of the way, to be reaching up in that direction.
I didn't say you needed two hands to get the door up or two hands to get the door down.
Okay.
It would go up and then it seemed to bind, and then you would have to have a second effort to get it if you really wanted it to go up, and it'd take a noticeable effort to get it to go all the way up. I never did try to go all the way up because I don't know if it would break it, and I don't want to damage their property. Bringing it down, it would take a considerable effort to pull the thing down. Two hands would help, but I think I would be able to get that door down quickly if I really yanked on it with one hand.
And I'll produce the video that I took today, but in all of the video I took today, there were either two hands or three hands. Sometimes Mr. Jolly helped you on that door. Do you disagree and said that you opened it and shut it with one
Don't
hand?
go by me though, I'm weak.
I did use two hands. I also did use one hand when I was inside the door. And I wanted to see if you could do it with one hand. There's no sense in me sitting here telling you that you can open the door with one hand and you can't. Now, it's not as easy with one hand as it would be with two, but I did go over to where Mr. Hill stand. And frankly, I did not think he was that far over until I got there. That's the value of doing a site visit compared to just looking at pictures. So I did purposely go over to that side of the door at one point and try to lift the door, and found that it wasn't any more difficult than it was in the middle. But I did use two hands and I did use one hand.
Okay. Did you find any inconsistency in your review of Officer Newman or Deputy Newman? I've been saying officer the entire time.
Sorry,
It's
can
fine.
you have to speak
Sorry,
up a bit,
yes.
yeah.
That's one of those looking down deals. Did you find any inconsistency in the description of the incident between Officer Newman and Officer Lopez?
Form.
I can't think of one as I sit here. I know there was a difference in perspective. As I said, Newman said he lost sight of the gun at around Hill's hip, and Lopez, I think, believed that the gun was pointed in his direction. So there was, they weren't exactly matching, but I don't think there was any major discrepancies, at least not that I recall.
Let's take a little break, and then we should be wrapped up right after that.
Off the record, 246. Back on the record, 252.
What did you bring with you today?
I brought the file that I collected.
Okay,
on
could
this
you run
case.
through, and I know we did it off the record, but
Yeah.
I gave you fair warning that I'd probably have you do it again. If you could show me what you brought, give me a brief description, and just kind of show it for the camera,
Okay.
that'd be great.
This first one says 911 call, and it is the questions and answers based on what the dispatcher asked the original caller. I didn't know what her name was. The answer that was provided, the question, the answer, down, it's relatively brief. That was based on what I was given initially. Then the second one is written in red ink. It says times based on review of operational comms, meaning the operational communications, and in black ink above it, it says info that Hill may be alive, and there's a series of times on the front and on the back. And those times are relative to the beginning time of the videotape, or the audio tape, rather than the time of day.
Okay.
How far into the
Makes sense.
recording that was. I enlarged I think I enlarged this from an original that was disclosed, and I don't remember which one it was. And what I did with it was I tried to take a ruler that I have and line up the tail of the defect with the center of what I believe is the entrance point, and then draw a straight line to see if they were parallel shots, if they were coming up, if they were going down. I was trying to find out whether the door was going up or going down at that time. I couldn't draw any particular conclusions from this, but it marks them with the distance over from the one side and the distance up, as mentioned in the report. So they're there. The numbers are in red: 1, 2, 3, 4 from the bottom up, and beside it, it says this says head wound. These two in the middle, it's marked abdomen, and then this one says bullet trapped and recovered. So that's the one that was trapped in that door hinge mechanism.
You made those designations before today, is that fair?
Yes.
And did you take any measurements today?
I didn't, because the measurements were taken today.
Okay. No ruler?
I'm sorry. The measurements were already taken, and there's somebody did that some time ago. So they're the same holes. I didn't bother.
No ruler, no force, no trajectory, or force necessary to pull up or pull down. None of those measurements were taken today.
I don't have any device that would do that.
Okay. What else do you have?
Okay, my report, which I believe you have a copy of.
I do.
And then there's one series here that starts with T1, and most of these documents say St. Lucie across the top, so I keep them clear. It starts with T1, goes through, and on the back it says T1A, and then T2, T2A, and it goes up to T11, and there's a line across the bottom. There's nothing on the back of 11A. There's no 11A. And they are basically things that were said on the 8-hour-long recording of the radio communication that was the operational channel at the time of this event. And the times that are beside it are the times based from the beginning of the recording forward, not what time of the day that is. Okay, so it's not necessarily verbatim in every case, and it's not, those times aren't precise. I can't remember if that was the beginning or when they finished saying it, I wrote the number down. But if you go to that time frame and go a few moments either way, you'll see these comments that are made.
Okay.
So that's that separate one there. And then the last one I have starts with number 1, and again on the back it says 1A, 2, 2A, and it goes up to 7A. And this represents the transcript of Newman and Lopez's statement, not a complete transcript the way the reporter's taking it, but this is what they basically said, so I would have a copy of the gist of what they said. And in some cases, I did put question and answer and tried to be fairly precise. This was their statements and walkthrough. So one is a statement taken on the 14th, and the other one is the next page is the walkthrough taken on the 15th. And the same thing with Lopez's initial interview on the 15th, and then there were some secondary questions. They stopped asking questions of Lopez, and then they asked a couple more. And then they did a walkthrough at the scene. I didn't write down what date that was, but this is just a transcript of the audio recording. As I said before, I didn't know that their actual transcript was buried somewhere else in the file, so I did that. And on page 7A, there are times taken from the PowerPoint that was part of the material that I reviewed, and I've got times when they were 10-7 both on the scene, times for shots fired, and I've just done some calculations based on how much time there was between each of those times, how many seconds. And then when the time the Kel-Tec was mentioned on the radio, the time the Glock was mentioned on the radio, an incident report number, the subject, his birth date, and he was 30 years old, and then how many cartridges Newman had left in his magazine, the description of the Kel-Tec with the serial number in his right rear pocket, that a DNA swabbing had been done, that what he was wearing, Mr. Hill was wearing black t-shirt, jeans, shorts, and then the same numbers relative to the height of the defect and the distance over from the one wall that was there. So that's it.
Anything else in the green folder?
No.
Anything on the green folder?
It just says St. Lucie SO.
Okay. Obviously, you have some stuff that didn't make the flight with you back at your office, I assume, the depositions and all of that?
Oh, that's okay. The stuff that I was given electronically.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Did you get anything paper? Any part of this file paper?
I don't think I did. I think everything either came by email or came through a Dropbox, because it was some of the material was a large file size, and I don't think I got anything in the mail. I don't think anything came by courier. If it did, it wasn't very much.
It's fine. I'd like to attach a color photocopy of the materials you brought with you today. I don't care how that's done, whether it can be done here or attached, or
the PDF.
You get it back to us.
Sorry. The PDF, I recall, should have been in color. I don't know if you printed it in color, but I'm pretty sure the PDF that I used scanned everything in color. Yeah, that's blue. Okay, so it may have been produced. It looks like it was produced in color. So you may have it right there.
Let me just, so we know what you had with you at the deposition, just attach a copy. I probably do have that. But
I don't know.
I don't know that I do. I think I just got the report.
I wish I had an answer for you. I do not. I will make sure if you were to get this, and I'm beginning to think you were, that I will get it to you. It will be scanned and forwarded to you not later than tomorrow.
Right. Still going to attach a copy, color copy, for purposes of today.
How are we going to do that, though? He's taking it with him. See, Kathy? All right, I didn't want to impose. Come on, I don't know. We're going to make a copy before we leave.
Any other opinions that we haven't discussed that aren't otherwise in your report as it relates to this case?
I can't think of one, as I sit here now. If you ask me for something that I didn't anticipate in court,
certainly,
there's no way I can know that. But nothing that I can think of right now.
Has your opinion been stricken by Daubert or Fry analysis or any other state?
Sorry, can you speak up?
Has your opinion been stricken by any court of law?
I don't believe so.
Have you been prohibited to testify in any court of law in the United States?
No. There was a case in Chicago where the court said that because I wasn't willing to be as precise as the other expert, that they didn't think my evidence would be helpful. After they got through cross-examining the other expert, it became apparent what value my evidence would be. I was on a plane on the way back to testify the next day, and the end result was an agreement between the parties to put my evidence in as a stipulation in this federal civil case in Chicago. So there was that instance. I don't know of any other case where there's been a Daubert challenge where I've been excluded from testifying.
And what I'm trying to understand is we get expert disclosures in these cases. And on the non-retained experts, there's some degree of what that person's going to testify to. In yours, it says, in compliance with Federal Rule of Civil Procedure 26, attached hereto as Exhibit A is the expert report of Chris Lawrence, his CV, recent depositions and trial testimony list, and the fee schedule for work as an expert witness. It is expected that he will testify in this case and give opinions consistent with the report. And so, well, that's weird. I guess Siri thinks I said her name. What have you testified to? I mean, police training, police procedures, use of force. What I'm trying to understand is what is your expertise?
Form.
Well, I've given evidence on police procedures, police use of force, police training, and within that, I use comments relative to how long certain things take based on examining experienced officers and the research consistent with that, and some other. I've provided foundations for all of my opinions where foundations are available. I guess it might help to understand where I come from in respect to the jurisdiction I normally have done a lot of work in. We had a person get up and say that they were an expert in a particular field, and the end result was a bunch of people went to jail. Later, when that expert's testimony was evaluated, they found out that it wasn't as reliable as it had been, and some injustices were created. As a result, the courts in Ontario have stated that the expert's role is to assist the trier of fact, not to just bolster one side, because that's what happened in this other case. It was criminal. It was criminal matters, and people went to jail that shouldn't have went to jail. So my perspective has been to assist the court, not just to adopt the version offered by one side or the other, but to assist them in understanding what it's like to do this job, what people can do and can't do, what they're generally told, what they're not told, what we know, what we don't know, and how long some of these things take because we've measured certain things so that the jury can better appreciate the evidence as they hear it. Also, maybe why, I believe it helps them understand why 2 or 3 people can see the same event and maybe come up with some different versions. And there's good reason for it. That's really what I believe I'm supposed to be doing, is helping the trier of fact, in this case probably the jury, not the judge, understand the evidence so they can make sense of it. So that's why we talk about police procedures and those sorts of things, but I wanted to assure the court that I am not making something up. Just trust me, I'm the expert, I know what I'm talking about, it's okay. I've indicated on the back of my report 3 pages of reference material where if you don't believe what I'm saying is correct, you can read the research material yourself and see if I'm wrong.
Right.
That's really what I do, and my experience has been that juries have found it quite helpful.
Okay. In kind of, I guess the reason I ask is you do venture into areas of almost a medical examiner, into biomechanics, into almost some form of medical opinions, and I haven't seen where you have a qualified basis to render those opinions, and this is where you can disagree with me if you think you should.
But I'm not trying to tell you what happened. I'm trying to tell you what we know, what's recorded in reliable sources about this kind of an event. Because it was really I can't remember if she was a Superior Court Justice or a Court of Appeal Justice, but the justice basically, I went to a seminar on using experts put on by a law school, and one particular justice said, if the world was perfect, neither side would call an expert. I would call the expert and say, I don't understand this. What does it mean? This makes no sense to me. Why are they saying these things? What's it like? Can you do this? And when she said that, it was like an epiphany. Now I know what my role is. I'm not supposed to say this is justified or not justified. I'm supposed to help the triers of fact understand the issues that surround these types of events so that they can make the decision on whether what happened should have happened or not happened, whether it was too much or not enough or lawful. And in that regard, it has to do with, why do you shoot more than once? Well, just because a person has a fatal wound doesn't mean that it's instantly fatal, and it doesn't mean they're incapacitated immediately. Was Mr. Hill incapacitated? You'd have to ask a doctor. But I know that shots to the chest, even shots to the head, do not instantly incapacitate unless certain features have been identified, and that comes out of reliable forensic medicine textbooks and shooting reconstruction textbooks and police-related textbooks on firearms. So it's within the literature that I have reviewed. It's within the police-related training literature. But I'm not going to tell you that Mr. Hill could or couldn't do anything. I'm simply saying I know that we fire more than one shot because despite the fact that it may be a head wound, despite the fact that it may be lethal, unless it goes through the brainstem or transects the spine between two particular vertebrae, continued movement is possible. They need to know that.
Right.
And if you have an expert that's going to get up, who's a doctor, and say, "Oh no, he destroyed the, the brainstem, and that's what happened," and this would have well, that's his area of expertise.
Would you defer to a medical examiner in this case?
If a medical examiner said that's what happened, then that's in his or her. That's on their dime. And if they're not correct or they're misstating the facts or what the research literature says, well, that's at their own risk.
Okay. Have you written any papers or been peer-reviewed on any issues related to intoxication and what someone can do or not do?
No, I've written peer-reviewed papers, but not on that topic.
Okay. Same question as to the biomechanics of injury, meaning a portion of the body is injured and what somebody can do or not do with that injury.
I've written some papers, but unfortunately they're classified and I can't discuss them. And they're on ballistics and they're on terminal ballistics on a bullet striking a body.
Okay. So if I ask you for those documents, you would tell me that you cannot provide them to me.
I cannot
Or
provide
you
them.
would have to kill you.
No. In fact, I used to put the source of that documentation on my CV. I don't do it anymore because it's classified. And after I thought about it, I shouldn't even be. So I can't discuss it.
And I understand. And if I can't look at it and a judge can't look at it, that's an issue for the case.
I can't pull it out and start talking about it.
I think that's all I have. I hit my 2-hour mark. Read or waive?
He will not waive. I will take a copy if ordered. If it is ordered, if you will send the errata sheet to me, I will ensure that it gets to him to make whatever corrections need to be made. I'm sure there won't be any. And I think that covers everything. I'll take a copy together. Yes, that covers it.
Deposition is concluded at 3:11.
Come on.